Call this meeting of the joint conceptual meeting of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the Franklin Municipal Planning Commission to order. We'll start with a roll call. Commissioner Allen's not here yet. Commissioner Franks. Here. Commissioner Harrison's not here yet. Commissioner Lindsay's here. Commissioner McLemore is here. Commissioner Mann is here. Commissioner Orr is here. Alderman Peterson is here. And Commissioner Williamson is here. Alderman Berger is here.
Present.
Alderman Brown.
Present.
Alderman Potts.
Present.
Alderman Baggett.
Present.
Alderman Barnhill. Blanton. Caesar. And Mayor Moore.
Present. Pull your microphone down just a little bit, Mr. Chairman. There you go.
There we go. Now I don't have to lean halfway across the table. Okay. The first item of business for the joint conceptual meeting tonight, the legislature has been busy. So we'll start with an overview of Senate Bill 2422 and House Bill 2425 related to public hearings and public notices associated with annexations, plans of services, and zoning changes. Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Evening, everyone. I just want to do a brief overview of some recent state legislation changes regarding annexations, plans of services, and rezonings. So the changes are really related to public hearings, published notices in the newspaper, mailed notices that get sent to specific people, and signage requirements. And this bill was effective July 1st, 2024 for any public hearings that were held after July 1st. So in terms of public hearings, there's just some minor changes really for us. The annexation public hearings will now officially be held at the Planning Commission meeting and at BOMA's meeting during the second reading of the annexation, like we currently do already at the BOMA meeting, but we will be adding a public hearing at the Planning Commission meeting. It really won't function any differently than what we do now because we already have a public comment period, but we will advertise it as an official public hearing according to the rules of the public notice for public hearings. So that'll be the main change. And likewise for the plans of services, we'll have the exact same change. That will also have a public hearing at Planning Commission. And then it'll have another public hearing at the BOMA meeting that will align with the second readings of the annexation and the zoning. So that's really a pretty small change, but it has other implications when you start adding in the public notice requirements. So for published notices that go out in the newspaper of general circulation, the first bullet really addresses one thing we already do. We do published notices for annexations and plans of service that include the time, place, and purpose of the public hearing, as well as a list of 3 public locations where copies of the plan of services can be viewed during business hours from the date of the notice until the public hearing. And we currently post those plans of services at the Williamson County Administrative Complex, Franklin City Hall, and the Williamson County Library. Some of the new requirements are that published notices should also include full copies of the resolutions of the annexation and plans of services. So that will all be in the newspaper. And then notices will have to be published in the newspaper no later than 21 days prior to each annexation and plan of services public hearing. So now that there's a public hearing at Planning Commission, we'll need to make sure that those notices go in 21 days in advance of the very first public hearing, which is at Planning Commission. So that kind of moves all public notices up fairly substantially in the process. Previously, we were doing 14 days public notice, but that was from the BOMA public hearing, which was at the second reading. So this will move it up over a month, essentially. Additionally, zoning and rezoning public hearings will have to be published in the newspaper at least 21 days in advance of its public hearing. But that public hearing only occurs at the BOMA level during second reading. So we will continue having rezonings considered for recommendation by the Planning Commission with a public comment period, but it will not be an advertised public hearing until it gets to BOMA at second reading. So that really doesn't change except for the number of days of publication. All right, any questions so far? Okay, great. In terms of mailed notices, we currently provide written notice of annexation to affected school systems 30 days prior to the public hearing. That will move up to be 30 days prior to the FMPC public hearing, so that will also come sooner in the process. And then a new requirement is that we send by first-class mail 21 days prior to the FMPC, that very first hearing on the annexation. We send a copy of the annexation and plan of services resolutions to each property owner within the territory to be annexed, each adjoining property owner, which means the person sharing a boundary with the property, or, according to the definition in the law, any property that is within 200 feet of the territory proposed for annexation. So it's not really just adjacent, it's also anyone within 200 feet. And then also the county mayor and the county commissioners whose district the territory proposed for annexation lies. So those are the changes for mailed notices. And then lastly, we have changes for signage requirements. Currently, there aren't signage requirements. Well, I shouldn't say currently. Before this bill was adopted, there weren't signage requirements in state law, but we voluntarily did do some signage related to annexations and plans of services. But now these are the new requirements, that the signage must be posted 21 days prior to the first hearing of the annexation, so prior to the Planning Commission meeting. The sign needs to be 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall, affixed to a sturdy base. The top of the sign can be no less than 5 feet from the ground, and it has to be posted at least 3 places in the territory proposed for annexation and along any thoroughfare bordering the territory. Remains up until the annexation is complete or abandoned. And then it has language that informs viewers of the annexation, the date, time, and location of the public hearing, and a website for additional information. And then also annexation and plans of services resolutions have to be posted on the property as well. So those have to be either attached to the sign or in a separate box next to the sign in case anyone wanted to go review those on the property. So that is part of the requirement. We are currently still working through some of these signage requirements with our sign shop in the streets department. We have done signage for quite a while, but they are not 5 feet off the ground, and they do not have a sturdy base. So we are working with them to try to get things that meet these specifications before the next annexation really lines up for a public hearing at Planning Commission. So we should have those resolved over the next few weeks, maybe month, before we really need to have them in place. But we are working through them. If we can't get the sign shop to produce those for us, we will consult with a local sign shop for that. So just in summary, there's additional public hearings for annexations and plans of services that will be held at FMPC meetings. There's some timeline and content changes related to the newspaper notice. We have additional mailed notices to county officials and neighbors. And we have the signage requirements that do have some service implications and some cost implications for us, but we're working through those. And then just so you know, we have a summary sheet that our staff works off of that reviews all these requirements. It's essentially a checklist for us based on dates leading up to a public hearing so that we can follow it and make sure we're not missing a step. And that's attached in Civic Clerk for you if you want to reference it. So, anybody have any questions or comments?
Any questions?
Yeah, the only comment I have is I've worked in kind of similar jurisdictions that have these sign requirements, and I know with your sign shop kind of resolution that I've seen before is they just kind of do two by four posts and a plastic print sign, and you can get them nice and tall, and it's
Yeah.
quick.
We've considered that for sure. So we may do something like that because we also have our own staff that goes, our planners go out and post the signs. So it's essential that we're able to actually post them as well. And not all of us are conditioned for that kind of business on the day-to-day basis, myself mainly. So I'm really trying to make something that's easy enough for staff to also go out and put in the ground.
Makes sense.
So,
No,
go ahead, Nick.
I was going to ask, do we pass, the mailing costs and a lot of these costs on to applicants, or how are we allowed to? I guess I've never thought about that.
Well,
until
we
now.
have review fees that often encompass the majority of costs that we incur. But at this point, we don't know what our costs for the signage are really going to be and the cost for the mailers that go out for the required mailings, or the cost that are going to be associated with additional newspaper notice. So I think what we'll do is take about a year, see how much cost we're incurring for the first couple annexations we get, because we don't get that many annexations each year. I think we can observe and try kind of add the cost up and see what we're really dealing with. And then when we come through with our next update to the review fees, we can incorporate that into the proposal, and you and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen can review that and see if you want to make those changes.
Okay. One question. So these public hearings then associated with annexations, plans of service, zoning changes, so forth. So we routinely offer public comment on any item on the agenda, but these are specifically differentiated, I guess, by calling it a public hearing. Is there any difference in the way we handle the filling out speaker cards and
No,
2
other
minutes.
than announcing it's a public hearing and us advertising it in advance as a public hearing with all the information required by state law. Oh, and you close the public hearing after the public comment is complete. Thank you. Those are the main changes that will
Okay.
occur.
okay?
And you feel like that summary sheet on the site will be beneficial? I mean,
The summary
would that
sheet is
look?
really just for reference for you, but it's really what we use as planners to make sure we don't miss a step
Okay.
in the process, because it's a lot to filter through. Every couple days, we have new a requirement that we have to check off, make sure we've done that notice, so we use it internally for tracking to make sure we don't miss a step.
okay. Well, I thought you said a box with a sheet. Okay. I thought you said something about a box on the site.
Oh, right.
That's
So
what I
we are-
thought you said. So what, I was wondering what benefit would that be?
Well, that's just a requirement of state law. I'm not sure that how many people are going to go into the site and pick up a
antiquated.
copy of the resolution and read it out on the site. But that has actually been a requirement for quite a while, since 2015, I think. That's been a requirement. And we have just taken the easy way, kind of, and taken some sheet protectors. We attach it to the sign, I believe, and put the copies of the resolution in it and just have it attached to the sign. And it weather protects it to a point, but we haven't had any complaints because I don't think a lot of people are utilizing that
Right,
as
I
a
doubt it.
resource.
That's so antiquated.
Okay.
I had a
Yes,
quick
ma'am.
comment that as we go through this process, I'd urge staff to record what the hardships are that they've created for us.
Certainly.
With this. This bill came from, the sponsors were from East Tennessee, so I don't know what happened there that urged them to start changing what we do. But if we could just record that and keep it so we could keep our legislative delegation informed.
All right.
Who all voted for it, by the way? There were no,
Yes. And in reference to the resolution being attached to the sign, our signs always have a web address that's very
Right, that's-
legible, and we really encourage people to go through the website channel for information.
Yeah, that's why I asked that question, because I felt like most people would go to the website. And as we try to get rid of paper everywhere, so we're just adding more.
And Mayor, to your point, we'll definitely track that. Thank you.
Well, you would think in this day of technology, we wouldn't be putting out sheets of paper on a sign.
Exactly.
You know, yeah.
We have discussed that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. A big old QR code, and they can just
Yeah.
zap into that. Yeah. We
Okay.
need to scratch this.
Sure.
So the additional, I guess, week in the public notice period, is that even doable, or is it going to push the overall process out to the next meeting for the
No,
public hearing?
it doesn't push the process entirely, but what it does is make us publish the notice before the applicant hits the resubmittal date to
That's
actually
what I
get
was
on
going
an agenda. So we're publishing it, expecting them to be on the agenda, but if they don't follow through and resubmit, or if there's an issue during the review process and they want to defer, they will have to come to the meeting and defer on the floor because it will already have been advertised.
Right.
So that will very likely happen from time to time.
To the mayor's, but more hardship on staff
Yeah,
keeping up with all
yeah.
that.
Yeah,
And more time in your meetings will be spent
exactly.
potentially deferring items at the applicant's request.
Right.
Okay. Other comments, questions? Alderman? Okay. Thank you, Emily. Does that wrap you up, Emily, on that item? Okay. Okay, so the next item is discussion of zoning ordinance updates related to Envision Franklin, modification of standards and variances. So, Andrew, are you, okay.
Thank you. So we're back trying to get feedback on potential zoning ordinance updates for the 2025 update to the zoning ordinance. So we're going to be going through a handful of different of the common modification of standards that we received, as well as the variances that we've received over the past year or so, and trying to solicit some feedback from you all to see if there are any sort of minor changes that we need to make or want to make in the zoning ordinance. So we'll be stopping periodically to just try to get some feedback to see if this is something that, again, you want us to evaluate or something that we should look into changing. And then taking some notes, and then ultimately, I believe we'll end up being back to just describe everything, that is potentially going to be a zoning ordinance update change. So, to kick things off, I just want to clarify the difference between what a modification of standard is and a variance. So modifications of standards basically are used as part of the PUD process that really just allows for flexibility within those development plans and within those PUDs, and ultimately get approved by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen through their PD zoning. Now, a variance obviously is a little bit different. It gets approved by the BZA, and they're intended to really rectify situations where there may be unique site conditions that create hardships for the applicant and for the property owner or developer, where they really just aren't able to meet the rules of the zoning ordinance without any sort of undue hardship. And those get ultimately approved by the BZA as a separate application. So just so everyone's on the same page. So I'm going to be discussing modification of standards, where Ariel is going to be discussing variances afterwards. So since 2020, there were 57 modification of standard requests, and that was basically since the adoption of the new zoning ordinance, and 56 were approved. So these requests came from 6 different chapters: signage, fence walls and screenings, parking and transit, street circulation, transitional features, and building types. So a wide variety of pretty much across the board from the zoning ordinance.
I was
So we're going to be taking closer look at the parking standards for multifamily and office. We've really identified this from both staff review and just comments that we've received through the process, through MOS requests, and through just working with the building community, that we may be overparked in the multifamily and office requirements. So Cherokee Place, Shawnee PUD, and the Middle 8 PUD are really recent projects that have requested MOSs to reduce their number of parking spaces. They've provided parking studies and reductions. They're really common in these discussions that we're having with them at the preliminary level and throughout the development review process. And they're really particularly related to our multifamily residential uses and multifamily parking requirements. So staff has gone through and studied comparable cities, ITE parking standards, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers. They provide a parking manual that is available to cities and developers that really just give a baseline of parking requirements on average for different types of developments. We've reviewed existing developments, applicant provided parking studies, and we've drafted some recommendations that we're providing to you all right now to just get some feedback if this is a route that we want to go down. So, our current parking standards for multifamily group up duplexes, multiplexes, townhomes, and your typical multifamily residential all into the same type of parking standards. So for every studio unit, there's 1.5 spaces required. Same with every 1-bedroom unit. 2-bedroom units require 2.5 spaces, and any unit over 3 bedrooms requires 3 spaces. So this would include if a townhome has more than 3 bedrooms, it would require 3 parking spaces. So staff recommended changes. Duplexes and townhomes should have their own specific parking standards. There should be a minimum of 2 spaces per unit, and they should be required to be off-street and on the property. Multiplexes also should have their own parking standards. Multiplexes are 3 to 4 units per buildings. This is typically like a quadplex. They should have, in these recommendations, 2 spaces per unit and required to be off-street. And we would pull out multifamily residential, which is buildings with more than 5 units, and align these standards closer to what ITE is providing to the development community, which is a breakdown of studio and 1-bedroom apartments, or multifamily, so condos as well. And then anything over 2 bedrooms. So this is the way that ITE standards are broken out. So we believe that it's probably more appropriate to follow along those standards, since that's what most people seem to be doing.
Are we going to talk about this after the whole thing is finished?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to provide an example on the next slide, and then we can discuss it. So staff recommended changes would be studio and 1-bedroom units have 1.25 spaces, and anything over 2 bedrooms would have 2.25 spaces. So if we look at a very recent example of the Middle 8 development, according to the 2020 ordinance, they would be required to have, for 126 studios and 1 bedrooms, 189 spaces, 220 spaces for their 2-bedroom units, 120 spaces for their 3-bedroom units. So their total required parking based on the 2020 ordinance would be 529 spaces, both on and off street. So this is a total supply ratio, which is basically the average of the total number of parking spaces by the total number of units, regardless of however many bedrooms there are. So this means regardless of what type of apartment it may be, it has 2.08 spaces. Now, they came in for a modification of standards. It was approved. They provided a parking study and a lot of information that we won't go over here because it's pretty in-depth. Ultimately, their MOS request was to create a separate garage that has 400 spaces. And this was supposed to be used only for the residential aspect. Now, that 400 space garage would have a supply ratio of 1.57 spaces per unit. However, because there are streets throughout that development, and we do give credit to on-street parking, especially since there is a mixed-use commercial component, they provided ultimately 486 spaces, which for garage and on-street gives a supply ratio of 1.91 spaces per unit. Now, in the example that I've provided with staff recommendations, there would be a total of 445 spaces required by the zoning ordinance for a total supply ratio of 1.75 spaces per unit. So this really does seem to find a nice little middle ground and is pretty comparable to the other MOS parking requests that we have received and that ultimately were approved.
Is that on and off street?
This would just be the requirement, so they could potentially provide it off-street or, on-street. This would be more comparable to this bottom portion in this middle example.
All right.
And I'm happy to answer any questions or go back to staff recommendations rather than these number examples. But we'll take a pause here to just discuss parking.
Ann, did you have some comments?
Well, one of the first things would be, because the Middle Eight did get a use of the the on-street parking. If you look at the housing that's already there, many of them were also using on-street parking. It's going to be interesting to see how this really works. And they said sometimes even the people that are at the factory park, already on the streets that are there. The other thing is on the studio apartments and the one-bedroom units. I had just written a note to myself say, how many of those are occupied by one individual? I think that was something that you need to be thinking about. Do we have any information on what that usually is? Because if there's more than one individual there, they're probably going to be two adults,
No, we don't have
both of whom might have vehicles.
That is potentially true. That's why we look at the supply ratio and give that quarter of a space sort of flexibility, because it is possible that there are, two individuals and two cars parked for a one-bedroom apartment
right.
or a one-bedroom unit. So really, the only difference in our current parking standards, which we've been told and provided information that is too high, is a quarter of a space per unit. So ultimately, if there are a large number of studio or one-bedroom apartments in a development that have a large number of, cars parked to them, then we may end up seeing a little bit of conflict there. However, that quarter space is also potentially higher for a two-bedroom unit, requires 2 1/4 spaces. So typically, a two-bedroom unit, maybe two roommates, and they have two cars, and
Right.
we gain an extra quarter space there. So there are little bits of fail-safes if, different units have different total number of vehicles, which is why, previously we were doing half spaces, and why the current recommended changes would have quarter spaces, just because it does allow for that little bit of flexibility, and ultimately could cover a single bedroom apartment with 2 cars, or a 2-bedroom apartment. When I lived in Franklin, I had a 2-bedroom apartment and 1 vehicle. So it does work both ways as well.
But it would be interesting to look at what the situation is with some of the places that are already here, built and everything, to see if we could find out about that, because I have no idea.
As part of the parking study that was provided when the Middle Eight development was going through their development plan, they studied a lot of the comparable multifamily developments within the city.
And they said there are extra parking places. I know that.
That's correct. Even when very highly occupied, like most of our apartment buildings are, there was ample extra parking. So staff does feel that the reduction would still be very appropriate, and we would just be closer to having the right number of parking spaces in these parking lots rather than having a large number of access spots.
And I think,
Commissioner Williamson.
yeah, I think the, kind of the only question I have, I know you're kind of using the example of I think it was the Middle Eight on that. And I know, some older units, older developments versus newer developments, something that always changes is the desired mix of those units. It used to be that studios were not popular. They had more stuff for, higher number of bedrooms, and kind of more current times they're doing the studios, the one bedrooms. And we've seen a little bit of that where developers will come in and change the mix of their units. So I think that'd be my only question is right now, kind of in that example that was given, it's about 50% that, these smaller units. And I would be curious to know if that's kind of indicative of what we're seeing as far as typical market demand, specifically kind of in the Middle Tennessee region, because I know that can also differ for different areas. If that is in line, then I think the numbers and kind of studies they've done are comparable, but I also know kind of some of the older developments might have a different mix, and so those available parking, it might be different. Just something to look at, especially going forward, is what are those trends. And then also looking at the kind of duplex and townhomes, 2 spaces per unit. And I know previously it was kind of like a 1.5 requirement for some of the smaller units, and I'd be also curious on that. What are they building? Are they building kind of these like very small townhomes where we could perhaps be over parking again, or are we seeing townhomes that are kind of setting in that 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, where these numbers kind of do trickle out to what we expect them to be, of a slight reduction if we're already over parking? So just unit mix versus, parking spots.
Okay. And just to kind of follow on that, I think that to track going forward, as new developments come in, are there still requests for modifications of standards, or does this satisfy the demand, if you will, by the developers to overall reduce the amount of parking that is presently required? I don't know to what extent there's a way to track going forward existing structures and say, are we hitting the mark, or I don't know. That's just the thought. Marcia.
Well, I guess the first thing that hit me when I looked at this item is that we were comparing Cherokee Place and Shawnee Place, which are actually Franklin Housing Authority's housing projects, to private entities, which automatically sent up a red flag for me. That was number one. Number two, because let's be honest, we should see a difference in parking requirements there just by virtue of what is the requirements to live in FHA owned projects. Number two was going along with our chairman is talking about is this the tail wagging the dog? Is this something that staff would have looked at before this? Do we see this as something that needs to be modified? I guess I want us to be very cautious because in some developments around some property that I own, we're seeing more and more people having to park on the street. They didn't start that out. When they build these new homes, these new $750,000 homes, they're now having, because I had someone call me, can my daughter park in your driveway where you don't have a home right now? No, she can't. We just bought her a new car. She's going to have to park on the street. So I guess what I'm just want us to be very, I guess, cognizant of is that we don't want to have all these nice, beautiful new projects where we're having to have folks park on the street. And I just want to clarify, the new recommendation here would be for townhomes and multi-family homes. With this reduction, this would be on-site parking. The old present one would include with the higher parking is on-street and on-site. With this reduction, it's on-site. Is that what you're saying? Only?
That's correct. So the current parking standards do not differentiate between a large apartment complex and a row of townhomes. These potential changes would require the multiplexes and the duplexes and townhomes to have their parking on their site. So whether that would be a quadplex with a private parking lot in the rear, or townhomes, their 2 spaces per unit could be covered by a garage or a garage and a driveway. But it would require them to meet their parking requirements on their property.
Okay, I just remember when I was on the board, I know she keeps bringing that up. But it's valuable experience. We had it, and I'm going to drive out there. God, as you get older, you forget things. Very nice apartments. I mean, I don't know now if we call them townhomes. They'd probably kill me if I call them apartments. But where we had reduced the parking because it seemed to make sense at the time. Clyde would probably remember. But anyway, and they ended up having all these cars parked on it's out 96 that way. I've got to go one day and look. But because we reduced it, they have all these cars parked on the side, which took away from the beautifulness, the aesthetics of the development. And I just want to make sure we don't do that. But we don't want to have a lot of empties either. But I just want to make sure that we've got this mix correct.
Roger, if you don't mind.
Yes.
This is a great discussion. I think parking is really tricky to find that perfect balance, like you're talking about, Marcia, of not over parking, not under parking. One of the things I know we talked about with staff is, especially for the duplex number, we had a preliminary plat recently that got approved, and partially because of the numbers that we require for those duplexes parking, they had to put a parking lot behind 4 lots that were duplexes. And so this idea of, oh gosh, like we want duplexes as infill to feel like a part of a community, but now we're getting a product that doesn't feel that way. So that was one thing that we were trying to tackle with pulling out duplexes and potentially townhomes as something different. Is this the right number? I don't know, but that's part of the thought process here is why we pulled them out. Just something to think about. And if you'd want, I do have the Middle 8 parking ratios to what they studied. If you have any questions about that, I can pull that up if need be.
Thanks.
I think that went maybe, Marcia, to your comment as well, that when we talk about Middle 8, because there's existing housing around the Middle 8 site, and they're relying on on-street parking on-site, on their site, and you don't want to create a situation where there's so much excess demand within the Middle 8 that they start parking on-site, on-street on the neighboring properties. So that.
Yeah, the way the ordinance reads today is when we do, like for the Middle 8, for their on-street parking that they counted, they could only count things within their development. So they can't expand and go outside their limits and go down, Daniels Drive and count those spaces that aren't even really there. But yeah, it's still that balance of, did we capture everything in their site so they don't have to spill out? Yeah.
You go to your next slide, just to clarify. So the current zoning ordinance, is that 2.08 or 2.18? I can't.
It's 2.08.
2.0. So your recommendation is to go from that, which is a requirement now, to 1.75. Is that what I'm?
That's correct. It would be about a third of a space per unit reduction.
Okay. Doesn't sound like a lot when you look at it that way, but anytime we're reducing parking, it makes me nervous because you can't add it back. Once it's gone, it's gone for good.
Right. Okay. Alderman Brown?
Yeah, and I appreciate that comment because I do appreciate staff looking at this because I do feel like we felt like we've been overparked, but even to Marcia's point about the Housing Authority properties in Middle 8, all three of those to me were worth a conversation because they are contextually different. When we looked at Middle 8, part of the reason that I felt good about this was you're talking about an area that should really be a walkable area. You've got the factory, you've got the park, you've got downtown. You also had a lot larger mix of studios and one bedrooms, and all those studios and one bedrooms were also a smaller footprint than what we typically see in studios and one bedrooms because we were trying to create some affordability. So when I'm reviewing that one against the parking standard, I kind of appreciate MOSs sometimes because they create dialogue, they create a conversation, and I think a lot of these decisions sometimes are very contextual. And so in those cases, I think all of those deserve that conversation and deserve that change. Where I don't know if you were building a multifamily, outside of town somewhere where you knew everybody was going to be traveling a lot, you had maybe more cars, you had more families, that might not be appropriate. So I appreciate looking at it, and maybe we should consider a change, but I don't mind the MOSs to have the conversation to say contextually this should be different than this one over here. And I also did appreciate your comment about the parking lot behind the lots, because I do think sometimes when you start doing the parking, it does force changes on how you do those site plans. It changes how we front buildings, it changes how we add entrances and all of that, and it can immediately change the look and feel of something that we're trying to create. So it's a tough balance.
To that point, and to Marcia's question earlier about are we just looking at this because there were a few modifications of standards, staff has felt for a while that our parking ratios are not right on a few different particular uses, multifamily being one of them, and townhomes and duplexes. We haven't really studied it or made changes since around 2013, I believe. And we've been living with this for a while. And Envision Franklin really supports multifamily as a use, primarily in regional commerce, neighborhood mixed use design concepts, where we really are encouraging a walkable mixed use pattern of development. So to that point, we really aren't, unless we see a Envision Franklin plan amendment come through for just strictly multifamily residential as a design concept, most of the projects are coming in areas we want to be walkable, viable, mixed-use areas. So this does go along with that thought process too.
And especially on projects like the new development proposed around the Cool Springs Galleria Mall, large areas, large multifamily, but walkable, and so when you start trying to decide how you're going to use that mass of what is today parking, that it's appropriately divided. Alderman Potts?
Yeah, I've got more of a dimensions question for you. What's the current dimensions as far as length and width that's a minimum requirement for these spaces? And then knowing that y'all already looked at that, as I'm hoping at least, as you started your evaluation process, was there any consideration of making those changes? And I'm asking as a guy that drives a larger vehicle, and we've got a lot of trucks, a lot of large SUVs. I recognize there may be a balance of smaller vehicles, but I have a concern as we look to make possible changes is that some of these apartment units, these multifamily locations, may go with the very bare minimum amount and cause some issues.
Our minimum width is 9 feet, and our length dimension is generally 18 feet for a 90-degree space. If it's angled or if it overhangs a sidewalk, it might be able to be shortened by a foot or two. But generally, for just a 90-degree angled spot in the middle of a parking lot, 9 by 18 is the minimum, which is pretty standard.
I wouldn't change that.
Yeah, we're not planning to make changes. And in fact, if you're next to a landscape island, I think you're required to do a 10-foot wide spot.
To that point, if I should, Kroger on 96, they came to us and asked for modification standards to, it was a double, I think it was reduce the number of spaces and increase the size of the spaces so that they could accommodate larger cars, and we passed it.
And generally, that's actually a really helpful process for a modification of standards, because we also don't want additional asphalt just for the sake of additional asphalt. It causes additional stormwater runoff and the other environmental considerations. But when there's a a good reason, and that's what their customers really need for the function of the property, it's a great reason to grant an MOS.
Just a question about on that. Now we're basically 9-degree angle coming in, but it seems to me in all the old ones that have the, nicer angle and everything, it's a lot easier to get in and out and with less space.
And you're allowed to do angled, the dimensions are just a little different. I think those are 9 by maybe 20.
But I thought we had really kind of pressed everybody to do the 9-degree, and that has made, you have to have a lot more space. When you're driving.
Yeah, there's still an option to do angled. We just don't see it as frequently. We don't see it proposed as much. But we don't regulate between requiring one or the other.
Yeah. And to Alderman Potts' comment, it took me 3 attempts to get into my parking space out here. My truck
Thus the question.
My truck is challenging too. Alderman Baggett.
Is the staff recommendation above or below the ITE guidance?
The
More
ITE
or less.
The ITE guidance is significantly smaller than
Less.
staff's recommendation.
Right, so
significantly.
Significantly less.
It was about half of what the 2020 ordinance requires.
The 2020
Now,
half.
correct. So because Franklin in itself has a larger number of cars than we would expect the ITE manual to really, we are a driving dominated community. So staff did not feel it was appropriate to reduce to the ITE numbers for residential. Nor do we feel that if any applicant came in with just wanting to use the IT numbers, that would be appropriate. So staff really did try to dial in and find a number that would reduce it, however, not be a drastic reduction, as really just a small little baby step to make sure that, if we do go forward and change the zoning ordinance, that this would not be a massive change. But yes, ITE was significantly fewer than what staff is recommending.
And who so there's been a lot of questions about looking at, how many one-bedrooms and how many cars, like lots of study things that I think that study probably that number is developed off of some sort of extensive study, I would guess, right? I mean, they don't just, they have done all the
ITE
research.
manual?
Yeah, the ITE manual.
The ITE manual is compiled based on the information that the Institute of Transportation Engineers receives. So the newest edition of the manual is online, and you can specifically specify how tall the building is, if it's near transit, what type of environment you're in, whether it's urban or suburban, even the small scale suburban, not near transit figures that were given were frighteningly low. So
That's good. No, and I think that's good. I'm glad I asked, because I think when I look at the 30% less and whatnot, it does kind of from our paradigm of where we have been existing, which is the standard that we have had, it does feel like we're lowering it. I don't know, but I mean that's the whole thing. We don't know. I don't know. It's kind of like shooting in the dark. But it's good to know that the actual standard, the ITE standard, which there's engineers, I'm certain that there's study that has gone into that number, and they can probably back up those figures, but I'm glad that we're not going to those, right? I'm glad that this is it seems to be a baby, some may feel it's a baby step, some may not, but I do think I do think our standards are too high. It's consistently, even if we don't hear for an MOS, I'm sure y'all are consistently hearing this in staff's reviews, like this is a lot of parking, and they may choose not to come get an MOS. They may just choose to do it. But I think I'm hearing it as well on a variety of things, and a lot of times it makes sense. So I would be in support of doing something. I don't know if this is the number. I am kind of surprised that the staff recommended changes is less than the MOS for Middle 8. So it's even further reduction of parking than we decided that we would do. So that delta actually is more concerning to me. The 40 spaces between what we did and what you recommend, that is more concerning than making a change in general. Not that, but I don't know how, that's just one project specific. You pick a different project and it's a different mix, and it may be the opposite because of the mix of units, but it doesn't scare me. I do think it does have a lot of, I think it will get us at a better starting spot. And quite frankly, if we have those situations where we think there needs to be more parking, couldn't we make if we don't feel comfortable with the number of spaces couldn't we? No, you can't go the other way. So I would just say, let's be a little, I would be more conservative maybe even on these numbers. If you can adjust them up a slight bit and get it more equivalent to that. I don't know. But see, this is the thing.
So
I don't know.
To clarify, their MOS request was specifically for the multifamily parking, and their approved request was for 400 spaces. So the staff recommendation is 45 spaces higher than that. But because the development, we wanted to just really show you sort of exactly how many spaces would be on that development, but because it's mixed use and they have commercial components and a share ratio, which we won't get into because it gets a little hairy pretty fast. They ultimately did provide 486, but that includes the required parking for all of their commercial components.
Understood.
So their
Thank you for
MOS
pointing
was
that
for
out.
400 spaces.
So thank you for pointing that out. So actually, the new requirement would be higher than the middle eight by
That's
48.
correct.
Thank you for clarifying. And in that case, I would support
And
this.
also, just to help you feel a little bit better, of the 7 properties that they provided in, Middle Eight provided in their study of sites throughout the city along Liberty and in Cool Springs, there's only one that their ratio is higher than our request. There's one that says it's 1.89, but all the others were well below the 1.75. So existing buildings are living lower than what our recommendation is.
Do you know if the mix on those studies of units was comparable?
I can't tell you that. They did not provide the mix of units. I don't think they could get that information. They were able to get the total number of units. They got the unit occupancy rate. So just because there are extra spaces, we wanted to make sure that the building wasn't just half unoccupied. So they had total units, unit occupancy, and then the ratio of what's out there.
Okay.
Okay. You want to proceed on?
Great. We'll continue forward to talk about slightly different parking, office parking. So this is a lot more simple. The ITE averages for office parking in a suburban environment are approximately 1.95 spaces per 1,000 square feet. The ordinance currently requires 4 spaces per 1,000 square feet. We have noticed that office is significantly overparked, especially after COVID. Office uses and needs have changed. So given that there's still some unknowns about the future of office uses, staff is recommending a reduction to 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which is right in the middle of what we require and what ITE says is necessary. And this is what Berry Farms Town Center uses in their requirements. So we do have an example of this being used and this working okay within the city, but I will also leave it open for questions and comments to get feedback regarding this potential change.
I would just like to say I think this is kind of in line with what's happening. I know the state of Tennessee made recently the decision that they actually don't have enough parking spots for all their employees if they came in downtown. And that's, from what they've been seeing as far as trends, because so many workers are now, there's a percentage that's always going to be remote. And if you try to make them come in, they're not going to be there. So I think this is a kind of a bigger trend that is going to stick. And I know the state of Tennessee has made kind of that no return decision in their office space.
Okay. Other comments?
I'm
Questions?
just going to say, whenever I was first living here and teaching in Columbia, I was able to ride, to share a ride with other people and everything. But then, it got to be that, I had to have a car, my husband had to have a car, so it just depends on a lot of things now. But it will also be interesting to see how it continues because, as I say, many people are working from home, you know. But if you're not thinking about that, I don't think very many people are walking to work. I would say walking from home, you know, would not be one of the things that we could count on. But maybe working from home, we could.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of uncertainty about that too, because I'm hearing more of companies that are saying, okay, it's time to come back. It's time to come back to work.
Yeah. Yeah, that too.
And I've had people decline to accept positions in our office because they were like, well, I'm used to working from home, so
Right.
if I have to come to work 3 days a week, then I'm not interested in the job. you know.
Right.
And so I don't know how that plays out. The fact that drop into 3 is still offers cushion above what ITE requires, it seems like there's that level of cushion in there that would kind of accommodate one versus the other.
It's also possible because this would be a change that requires this parking for new development, or if someone were to change their development plan and take up and get rid of some of their parking lot, we may not really even know if this was the right change for another decade because
Yeah.
we may not get new, office space where this really triggers anything. So this would only really impact new development.
So
true.
why would we? Well, go ahead,
Commissioner
sorry.
Orr.
And this is just, when you use Berry Farms as an example, we're just talking about the office area of it, not where the restaurants and things are.
That's
Good
correct.
point.
They have
That's a
in
big
their
difference if you try to go down there and nowhere to park.
Right, absolutely.
Right. This is specifically for
Exactly.
the office uses within that development. They have their own manual for parking within that development. That also speaks to like duplexes and the townhomes and the single family and what the requirements are for those units. But specifically for their office, they said that they were using a ratio of 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet of office and dedicating those spots for those office uses.
One other question I would probably have is we probably won't know what the impact of that is until we get more office space. But if you had, say, something existing that was an office, and maybe they want to take some of that square footage and change the use where it would require higher parking, then the remainder of the office could go under the new three spaces. Would that be correct? Okay. So then they can rebalance it.
Right, they could recalculate, and if they have 10,000, square feet, and they were like, okay, well, before
So
we
maybe we
needed
might
this
know if
many
it works a little
spaces-
bit sooner.
Correct. If someone wanted to spend the money to tear up their parking lot and
Or-
potentially change their
Well, how
development
about-
plan and put
In
something
a strip
new
mall,
in
maybe
and-
it goes to a
How
restaurant.
about Cool
whatever.
Springs?
Well, it might
Galleria.
help with some of these giant parking lots that we have all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe they could get smaller and get more mixed use or more other developments in there because now they have a different
Well, like the
ratio
mall.
to play with.
Yeah,
that's right.
Let's
By
take
the
some
mall.
chunks out. Now you
Right.
have some more real estate to do things with.
Yeah, they're doing stuff over there
Commissioner
anyway.
Allen. Marcia.
Well, I guess my thought, because I have some friends who had been working from home since COVID, and their edict just came out, as you were saying, that said, we will not be working from home anymore. So I guess my thought was, okay, so like you said, we won't know, but ITE, their averages as far as parking are so far below us right now. And I was thinking about, some places have subway, some places have rail, and we're like, I'll be dead. My grandkids will probably be dead by the time we even think about rail. But anyway, so if we're so far off on that, and we're now at 4 spaces, and as you say, we may not know for 10 years, but we're looking to make this change now, right? And we're going to be stuck with that. I guess my thoughts were, if I'm going to build an office space, okay, and I have this corporation, I'm going to build it for the number of people I know that I need. It's not. I'm not going to propose 100,000 square feet, and I know I'm only going to have 10 people in there. So I'm building for what I know I need. I guess my thoughts would be, we can't predict what's going to happen with how many people are going to be working, who are going to work from home. So why would we make this move now when we are saying we don't know what's going to happen? We're not going to, when are we going to update this again? Another 5-10 years or whatever? Why would we make this change when everything's so uncertain, is what I guess I'm saying. Because it's not going to affect existing. Is that true? It does affect existing?
Theoretically, it could.
Because they're already built, right? Well, isn't it already built?
If they came back in,
Okay, so if they want to add on, it
Yeah.
would. Okay.
Or
All right.
redo
Well, then
the
that makes a difference. Okay. Okay, I can see that then.
Yeah.
Okay. Ding, 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 ding. All right. Like I said, I'm getting older. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Any other comments, questions? Proceed on.
It is. It is.
all right, so we're going to pivot a little bit to signage. So one of the other prolific MOS requests that we are getting, or concerns that staff is getting throughout the development process, is our signage code and our sign portion of the zoning ordinance. So there are 3 concepts related to signage that we just want to get some feedback on, whether to change or allow them within the zoning ordinance. So the first one would be signs above canopies. Currently, the zoning ordinance would require any sort of signage to be on the flat part of the canopy. So we have received some questions about whether the signs could be above the canopies, which is currently not allowed. So I'll leave that open to see if there's any sort of torches and pitchforks related to signs above canopies.
I'm just trying to think of an example that would be something horrible that we wouldn't want. I'm trying to think of what's the worst case. I don't know. Because I know all these look pretty nice in the presentation. I'm just trying to figure out how would we regret this,
Well, can you talk about the size, the font, that kind of thing? I don't know.
Size,
Because I look at this
proportions,
and I'm like, what's the matter with canopies? I don't see anything wrong, but if somebody did some crazy thing, but I think your height, I think it would have to be, you couldn't have letters that were like this and different sizes, different heights. I think you could write that in.
Well, all of our signs have size requirements.
Yeah, for
and
the letters.
illumination requirements. So you can put those on
And you
this
want
as well.
the letters to be seen. I mean, that's appropriate size to be seen too.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
I think my general thought on signs before we get to the other ones is that I think our ordinance should be fairly conservative because signs are so subjective that getting an MOS to consider a sign probably isn't a bad thing. It creates that dialogue, and it is so contextual no matter where it's at, unlike parking where it's contextual, but not nearly as contextual and subjective as signage. I think as a guiding standard, we should err on the side of conservatism, and then if we like the designs put forth in that context, approve the modification of standard. I think just as a guiding principle, because we don't know what we don't know. I don't know that we should put the burden on us sitting here today to figure out how that could go so wrong.
To clarify, MOSs are only for PUDs and PDs and development plans. Theoretically, we could get a company that wants to come in that is allowed to develop by right and goes the site plan route. They do not have the MOS as a tool to allow for different signage.
And how does that relate to the In-N-Out Burger, the whole?
I mean, that was their.
So-
That's a little different too.
I like that. I love Halo.
The In-N-Out Burger had many reasons why they needed to do MOSs, not just signage. So the PD was the appropriate route for them. I think what Eric's talking about is just as simple. I mean, you could think of it as simply a McDonald's, a single building, single lot site that can meet the requirements in every other way. if they wanted to have words above their canopy, now they don't have that option at all. The only avenue to go is the PD route. And so instead of developing by right a 2-month process, they're in a 8-month process because they have to do 5.5 months through the PD process and then follow that up with a site plan.
So I think that's almost exactly what I'm trying to, yes, that is a conservative approach, but I think it is those single site occupants that would have the idea that we wouldn't want to see. I mean, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
you look at like Pigeon Forge or somewhere at Gatlinburg, where like, it's the eccentrics of it, right? I mean, you get some crazy signage. And that's exactly what I could see happen if you allow for a single tenant to have that kind of signage rights.
Be just allowing text, or, because the examples you showed just showed text. I'd be more okay with having like text allowed above canopies than logos and various other things. Like I don't have no problem with text on top of the canopies, but does that? can
I
you
don't
say-
think we're allowed to regulate the content of the
You
sign.
can't, like, so you'd have to, it'd have to
Is
be.
that correct? Oh, we don't already allow pictures.
allow
We
pictures?
do not allow pictures? Okay, we do not.
Well, hold on. No, yeah, we did. We got, I see, I'm looking at
I
ice
was gonna
cream
say,
cone.
like,
That's a upcoming conversation.
Okay.
On the right-hand side of the slide. Yes.
Okay.
okay.
Well, I don't know what to do now because, what to say. But I'm more okay with the text being a part of the zoning ordinance because Nick made a great point. And I agree with him, but also like, you know, if I wanted to put boxwood above the sign, like just in text, I don't know that, you know, but I think if I wanted to put boxwood in a big glowing logo and I got to choose and that was about right, like I think everyone would have a concern. I don't know. Well, I wait on pins and needles for what's coming next.
Well, and I hate to throw another consideration to this, but, you know, is it lighted versus unlighted? You know, I know that's another thing too, because, you know, we're going to get into halo lighting next, but, you know, if you have a backlit thing that's bright red versus, you know,
You can limit
some
it.
understated text is different. And I think too, just looking at what we have, you know, is it, you know, are we, yeah, it's just kind of aesthetics.
Now, it is
Subjective.
possible that everyone in this room feels that our signage ordinance discussions are potentially too complex and we start going down these avenues, in which case staff, you know, we wouldn't be able to make those changes or dive down that road. There are companies and professionals that deal specifically with signage ordinances because we get into this complexity where it's like, well, what if we do, what happens this, what happens then? So that is a route that the city could go down, is reviewing the signage portion of the ordinance in its entirety. If we get feedback along these lines where it's like, well, it could be okay, but what if it's not? So it is a route that we could dive down that ultimately a professional that is not us looks specifically at this portion of the code.
Probably.
Because and we've spent months talking about signs.
Years ago.
Lord.
And
Yes, we
recall the time that, you know, MAPCO started painting all their canopies, you know, lime green. And we're like, no, not in our, and we had a lawyer come in here and he, well, this is what our corporate standard is. You got to let us do. No, we don't. We don't have to let you do anything. That's been some years ago. And then that MAPCO on Hillsborough put pictures of giant hot dogs in their windows facing the street. Well, no, can't have giant hot dogs in the windows either. So and then it's size. It's about size and small stature and things like that. So I mean, we could spend an inordinate. So I guess my question is maybe how, because we went through a lot of discussion about unusual and different signage for the In-N-Out Burger. We went through just a couple of months ago a lot of discussion about multiple MOSs for the property over on Carruthers and the Meridian property, and
That was all.
I want big tall signs. I want, you know, and I want a half dozen of them, and so I mean, how much what are we hindering? What kind of delay are we causing? What kind of issues do we cause by not making any changes? I guess it's just a question I throw out, so.
Or would In and Out, if we adopt this recommendation, would In and Out be able to come back with what we approved?
No, because
So
they're
another-
vested.
Another
So-
corporation come in here and they may have a different logo or some unusual sign that's taller or wider or something. And that's gonna, are we doing this because of In and Out Burger?
No.
No, I think
No.
what Eric mentioned is that we've seen several of these MOSs and they've always been approved. Minus, I think, a couple with.
There's
Right,
been
right.
A couple, no.
one MOS since 2020 that has not been approved. And it was basically for alley length. So
It was for- okay.
ultimately, what is being brought forward with these MOSs is these are some of the things that we've seen that ultimately get approved.
Right.
Do we want to just change it so it saves the applicant and yourselves a little bit of time since they're getting approved anyway?
They can't get
Now,
what they want.
if we start saying that, like, well, we like the conversation, that's fine. That is a perfectly acceptable answer, and we won't change it. This is really just trying to get feedback. Staff doesn't have any recommendations related to the signage. It's just to see, if this is something that's worth changing since we're already going to be updating the zoning ordinance.
Wasn't there a standalone jewelry store that got denied their signing requests?
It got denied their variance request. I think we're going to get to that one next, or soon, but, yeah.
Can I preempt? I mean, I think we can
I
keep
like
going
to
through,
hear more.
we can keep going through these. We can keep going through these, but
Yeah.
I don't know that I think at the end of this conversation, we're going to have a bunch of different opinions.
Right.
And it's going to end up that we want to go hire this professional to look at our entire signing ordinance.
yeah.
We're not going, if these three things are not going to change the MOS situation, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think we need someone to come in and tell us how to adopt a sign ordinance for 2024 with all the different types and new things, signs that exist, and adjust it and give us the guidance.
Well, I guess
If
my
we
question
change
to
these
you
things-
is, do you think it's broken in a sense that it does need that? Or are you
Well,
okay with how
not
it
up to date.
is?
So you,
It's not in the 21st
Okay, hang
century.
on.
It's not broken.
Commissioner Harrison, you have a comment?
I take a different approach on it. What if, you said we've had few requests for a modification standard on signage. Does that not mean our ordinance is working?
It's working.
right, absolutely.
And why do we go in and open a can of worms on things that we can't even sit here and agree on?
Because,
Should be lit, non-lit?
because people are coming in to our community or building who live here, and we got to get in the 21st century here. Things are changing.
He don't look over here.
There's a lot of great design out there, and I don't think we should prohibit that. I mean, it can be good. I mean, look at these signs above the canopy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with any of those. The lighting, it's pretty subdued.
Yeah.
And at night, and a lot of times when you have these mixed uses now, you can get a modification of standard on some of these you cannot. As you said, you cannot apply for one. So then we hinder those people from having any kind of creativity. But as you said, like Nick said, we don't want to go, how bizarre do we want to go?
Yeah.
So I'm with you, Patrick. I think we ought to hire somebody in here. We ought to take a look at this whole thing because we need to come up to date. We need to travel. All of you travel. And we look around at different places and you see, design and you see signs and everything. You go, wow, that's great. Like the little ice cream thing. What's wrong with that? I mean, it's an ice cream place. And it's done very tastefully and we could all have different opinions here.
Yes.
We could
Yeah,
beat
and it seems
this
like-
horse a long time, but I think having a consultant would be better.
Yeah, another example of an irregularly shaped, but it's historical. It's, the Gray's Drugstore sign. I drove down Main Street Saturday night with friends from out of town, and it stands out. It's an icon to downtown. It belongs there. We'd all miss it if it wasn't there. But at the same time, if something new goes in out near the interstate or
Mr.
Yeah, anyway.
Please.
That are before you with signage for discussion tonight are really the most common request we have seen that staff has also been supportive of making modifications of standards to. We have not at this point re-examined all the signage standards because that is a little beyond our capacity at this point. We would need assistance from a consultant. But these particular changes are things that staff has supported in the past that are commonly requested. Even if they haven't gone through the modifications of standards process, that we typically see proposals for a lot of these. Now, it's up to you if you want us to pursue a change at this time or wait. That is why we are discussing it. But we do have one signage variance topic as well that is causing some issues in implementation that I do think we should consider at this point. So maybe we'll keep moving through the rest of this so we can get to that. And we'll regroup on this particular topic. It seems like the general consensus is to wait and re-examine.
I have a question for you. When you said there are certain, if you're a PUD or what else, like you said you can have a modification of standard. Why can't other people ask for modification standard, and how do we fix that? Maybe that's the problem. We just fix that so people can get a modification of standard for across the board.
So modifications of standards can only be granted by the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So that's why they have to go through the development plan process, because those are the only plans that go to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen. So ultimately, it lengthens that time frame. Anyone can request can submit a development plan if they desire and submit a modification of the standards with it. But it changes the length of the process and the amount of complexity involved.
So let's fix that. When I see a problem, let's fix it. Why do we have to do that? We don't have to do that. We can fix the process.
If the board adopts the regulations, the board is the entity that has to change them, or they go to the Board of Zoning Appeals through the variance process, which has very specific standards. And those are not often applicable in an easy way to signage because you have to have certain hardships and physical conditions on the property. So
too much red tape.
I would think of it a different way too. I mean, I think always our goal is to make the process transparent and efficient. And to your point, I think the path is to find the right regulations that would make that process as transparent and efficient to most development as possible. I really think we should look at the MOS as like a tool for those creative but unique processes, not the standard. So the standard would be, let's get that ordinance right. And if it takes a longer study to make sure we get it right, I think maybe that's what I'm hearing everybody say.
And so earlier we were told that not everyone can ask for modification standard, but now we are told they can.
That's not
I'm
what they
confused.
said.
Well, we're going to study it
It's
a
a
little bit
different
more.
process.
We've got another section. I want us to be
Yes.
cognizant of the time. And so, Eric, if you want to proceed on.
Yeah, I think we're going to end up getting the same general feedback regarding halo lighting.
Yes, we are.
Currently, light either needs to be directed at the sign or through the sign, and you're not allowed to have it, permeating around like halo lighting. And then obviously we have the irregularly shaped signs, the elephant in the room being in and out.
I like them all.
Yeah.
I want to know what's wrong with halo lighting.
My hand's been
What's
up for
wrong
10
with it?
minutes. Oh, the irregular signs, the McDonald's that's being rebuilt, I guess, is that considered a rebuilt or a remodel, or what about that? When they have, the Golden Arch, I mean, is that going to be recommended is it going to be approved to be reinstalled?
Yeah, today.
So they won't have the Golden Arch anymore?
Nope, they're going to have to comply
The
with
kids
our
are going to
ordinance.
cry.
Well,
So-
that'll be interesting to see
Yeah.
how our signing
Yeah.
ordinance currently changes.
Yeah. So they won't be grandfathered in.
Our
No.
signing ordinance modernized McDonald's for our area.
It's already
Looks pretty
in
good
place,
now.
yeah. The new ones are already,
The new sign.
the new McDonald's.
Okay.
As a branding guy, that's terrifying to hear that even a brand like McDonald's can't have their identity.
Exactly.
That is.
They can have their identity.
I think so
Just
too.
on a
I
square
agree.
sign.
I really agree.
Go to Hilton Head, it's a brown sign.
And the kids won't like that.
I want to remind one, because there have been talks we could use MOS, leave it the same, use MOS. Well, we also sat with the Carruthers development, and these people wanted to have some of the best multi-use developments in the country as examples of directional signage. And they wanted to do something similar, and our ordinance wouldn't allow it. And that they had to come for an MOS for that. I think why I'm saying go to study is because, yes, we could say yes, yes, yes for all these three, but I just think that the thing needs to be updated. Why can't we do like they do in Alpharetta in their top nationally recognized developments for directional signage? Why do we have to just default to an MOS, and staff's looking at us and saying, well, it's 7 feet too tall, or whatever it was, taller than like the directional signage allowed, but like we're looking at a top tier development that we've gone and looked at, and you're all looking at us with, like we're crazy, not like we're crazy, but sometimes, and maybe you're right. But I think we need, those are the things at the base level, like the standard you said, that we need a standard set for the 2024 and then a conservative standard and then make MOSs. But are you going to tell every applicant that comes in, well, just ask for an MOS on anything you want to do with your signs. The board, we've given guidance to staff that like, we're good with MOSs. Like, then that's going to be a headache. Like, let's get a standard and then do MOSs off of that. Make it conservative. I don't like the relying on MOSs from now on out on this. We can do better.
I think a question too is the city of Franklin missing out on design, because signs are design. I think the big hesitation I'm kind of hearing is like what we don't see that we might regret, and hence a further study would help flush those things that we can't see, we don't see in our community, but could be an issue. So that's why we've approved it in the past. It's like, yeah.
Okay.
I like the idea of a study as well. Because some things have changed, and if you go to a business and you can't even tell what it is, you have a McDonald's somewhere and it's a little brick building, and you can't even tell that it's a McDonald's. And to me, I think they need the ability to be able to tell what their business is without making it so, we can get too excessive in this stuff. I mean, we can just take away from the creativity and the character.
Okay, that's enough.
I just got to
We have
This is
one more
only the first
section we
10
need to cover in the next 5 minutes, and I apologize that that's all we have.
Thank
So-
you. My name is Ariella Stanford. I'm a planner and staff liaison for the Board of Zoning Appeals. So I'm going to skip over some stuff for the sake of time and just get straight to it. So we analyzed all the variance requests for the City of Franklin from 2019 until today, 2024, and just trying to find trends and areas where possibly we may need to make an amendment to the zoning ordinance. So the first one here, this is that discussion that somebody had mentioned already. Currently in our zoning ordinance, wall signage must be located below the roof line of a building, regardless of parapet location or size. So staff has found that the variance requests for these cases are not often justified for variances, but an amendment to the zoning ordinance regulation may be appropriate to provide more flexibility for low-scale buildings. The 3 criteria for granting a variance are very specific, and these cases often don't meet those 3 criteria. So these cases are not often granted variance requests, but staff finds that it's worth discussion on whether or not this should be a regulation the way it is in our zoning ordinance. So from this picture, this is from a recent variance request. You can see the green dotted line is the roof line of the building. So under our current zoning ordinance, the signage on the wall needs to be located below this green line. So their variance request was to have the signage above that green line. So amending this regulation could possibly just provide more flexibility, most commonly with low-scale buildings such as this one. So staff's recommendation is to allow signage on the parapet if the parapet wraps all the way around the building and only extends a set maximum above the roof line of the building. So we specify this wording so that you don't have parapets just on the front of the building, primarily for the purpose of putting larger signage on it, and also specifying a set maximum for the parapet, again, so you don't have parapets taller, primarily for the purpose of having large signage on that parapet. So this is the recommended amendment from staff, and I'll hand it to you guys for discussion.
Just real quick on this, I completely agree with this. I work on a lot of restaurants. We put all our units up on the roof. And some of those units, okay, if you're lucky, they're 4 feet. They can go up to 6 feet, depending if you have condensers and everything. And so when you start to have, especially these low-scale buildings, it looks just bizarre when all your signage is super low on the building. And honestly, you don't have any square footage to put anything, even, if you don't want to put a lot. I do agree, with kind of regulating, okay, how high can these parapets be? The only thing I would maybe be concerned about is if you do have a building that comes in there with, say, extensive stuff on the roof, maybe the scale is still proportional, but then at that point, if they happen to have some use that requires screening on all sides, because Franklin does, are we again kind of going back to the thing where, oh, well, no, you can only put it, 3 feet above the roof line or whatever, just to be careful on that, to not end up with some structures that start to look odd and limit them again, so.
Do we have parapet requirements that provide that level for screening of equipment and so forth?
It has to be fully screened from all sides.
And then there, of course, then the building has to look proportionately correct.
Yes and no. I mean, if you had kind of, say, 14-foot ceilings in there and you have 6 feet of equipment on top of it, you could have very tall parapets and kind of short windows. So, it's kind of, from a construction standpoint, you don't want tall parapets because that's really expensive for structure to support a very tall parapet and all the loads that go into that. But also you don't want to have unnecessarily air-conditioned space because that's also, now your units get bigger and now, it's more expensive. So usually it's going to try to be more efficient, but like you wouldn't want somebody to just put, hey, we're going to put this big tower in the corner and it's going to be way above the roof equipment and we're going to put a big old sign in there and, because that gives us more signage. So, that would be like the violation of it.
Right. Okay. Other questions, comments? It seems like this, to me, it seems like this is a reasonable approach to doing this, allowing this signage above on a parapet. And I don't think it falls to any of us to, except for Jenny, to make decisions about parapet.
Is this something that everyone agrees we should
Proportionality
look
and things like
into?
that, but-
Okay,
Yeah,
just want to make
yeah,
sure we want to keep going with this.
I don't remember
idea.
why I was in the room for that Finks discussion, but I remember feeling like it was silly that we were denying that and actually detrimental to the business, to be quite honest with you. So, but I agree with you. We don't want single walls just for the sake of signage. I think this is a good recommendation, and I think it fixes a problem that I thought was kind of silly back then. So,
I think, is anybody not in agreement with that conclusion? Good.
Thank you.
Direction.
The only other one that I have today is the current time limit for variance requests is 1 year, and the applicant can request 1 6-month extension, and then the variance is expired. We're recommending to extend it to 2 years for the time limit for variance requests, with allowable 6-month extension if requested.
Is this for any variance? For any variance?
Yes. Any variance request.
I was
for
hoping
the Board
you
of Zoning.
shorten it from 1 year to 6 months. Time limit. Why are you going out 2 more years?
So we have had situations a few now at this point, whether it's historic properties. Sometimes issues come up and it's difficult to get that project to building permit phase within that 1 year, even with the 6-month extension. So we've had a few variance requests come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals and have to re-request the same request because that 1 year, even with the 6-month extension, was just not enough time.
What's the board's success rate of passing a variance request? Do you know the statistics?
I don't know the statistic on that.
I don't think it's very good.
You mean the pass fail rate?
very high.
That's all. I would just say, why is it 2.5 years? I agree with Commissioner Franks on a lot of things, but why wouldn't we just? That's 2.5 years, and I think why couldn't you just add a second 6-month extension granted by BNS and get it to 2 years?
We can
with good
do that,
cause?
but if you think of a site plan that essentially has how many years under vesting? 3 years under vesting to go ahead and get their building permit and get vertical construction going. Then they got a variance in their first year, but they wait and start construction right before that 3rd year hits. Then they have to apply for a variance every year until they start construction. So we're trying to line it up better with vesting legislation.
That makes sense.
Yeah. There's a reason. And thank you, staff. You may assume you've been provided directions. Are there any other things that we need to discuss tonight?
We actually had one other topic. We'll move it to the next meeting. But we do have zoning ordinance updates related to Envision Franklin changes that were recently adopted to discuss. And then we'll also be coming back next month with updates based on previous discussions for zoning ordinance amendments. We are trying to keep this on track for approval by the end of this year. So that's why we keep coming back to you.
Okay. That being everything, then I call this meeting adjourned.